Welcome back to the Biblical History Center podcast. I'm your, I guess we're all, I would say we're all hosts. We all co
Yeah,
together. Carlos Cantu, your executive director here at the Biblical History Center. And if you know that voice, you'll know that that is Miss Christy Barker, our director of programming and education. Christy, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you. It's good to be back.
It's very good to be back. I don't think we've been able to do much of a podcast since you came back. For those of you that may not be aware, and if you've been keeping up with
Oh,
us,
your microphone's cutting in and out.
oh goodness, let's try this again. For those of you that have been listening to us for a while, you'll know that Miss Christie is only here 2 days a week. Unfortunately, but she is very much with us all the time. She is very much connected to us. We're executing and working on some new tours that hopefully will be just a very exciting new thing that we're doing that will hopefully have the opportunity for us as an organization to touch more people. So, Christy, welcome back. We're again, I'm thrilled to have you back on the podcast. I know you are. So, let's jump right into it. Talk to me about what you've been wanting to talk about.
Yeah, thank you so much for that warm welcome. It's exciting to be back on the podcast talking with you guys about biblical history and archaeology. It's my passion. So, the first thing that I wanted to talk about is those earthquakes that happened back in February of last year in Turkey and northern Syria. Archaeologists are still going through and seeing the damage that has been done, and this is a very ancient part of the world, and so it affected the modern town of. I'm sorry for my Turkish friends if I mispronounce this, but the town of Atakaya. And this is actually built on top of the ruins of ancient Antioch, which is one of the early homes of Christianity. And the early church, was there. We know Paul went on missionary journeys there. And so it's just, devastating. This is why archaeology is such an important field. A lot of people might wonder, why does archaeology matter? Well, it matters because every time a natural disaster like this happens,
Oh, goodness, yeah.
things that have not yet been discovered, are damaged or possibly even destroyed forever. And we've lost that part of our history. So I know that Princeton has previously done a lot of archaeological work in ancient Antioch. But yeah, there's still so much there to be found. It's such a rich archaeological site. And so there's not just for Christians, but for people of other faiths as well. It's, just a terrible thing. So, for example, the oldest mosque in Turkey,
Oh
for the
yeah.
Muslims, that was destroyed in all of its beauty. As well as St. Paul's Church. It's called
Yeah, the
St.
Greek
Paul's Church.
Orthodox community, right?
Yeah, because
Right, since the 14th century, isn't it? It's just
yeah,
now
he,
ruins.
yeah, he founded the church there, so it's called St. Paul's Church, and now it's in ruins. Um, Thankfully, the synagogue was spared. However, the Jewish population in the area, is a bit smaller now, but um, this is just why archaeology is so important because the things that are put into museums. So, for example, the Hate Archaeology Museum um, has a lot of Roman mosaics that have been excavated from a lot of the mansions and wealthy, country estates that would have been around the ancient city of Antioch. And because these were already excavated and put in these museums, they are surviving now.
Right.
So they survived this earthquake. So it's just so important to preserve this not natural history, national history,
Right.
world history, and religious history.
Right. And there's also there's a surviving heritage site there, isn't it? What they
Hmm.
call the fourth century cave church. Is that correct?
Yeah, so
where
I
people
don't know if it's like on the
used to
National
cross the
Register or
bridge.
anything, but there is a fourth century cave church just in the outskirts of the city. It's thought that the Apostle Peter might have preached
Yeah,
there.
there's a
Um, Mount Starinus, I
race.
believe it's called.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys, these Turkish names are difficult for me to pronounce.
Well, what was interesting is when I approached Christy and I said, Christy, is there a reason you want to talk about this earthquake? And she said, it's not the earthquake so much, it's the damage that the earthquake creates that, just kind of is hurtful, right? If we could use that word, it's tough, of course, on the people, but on archaeological sites where so much could be lost because of these natural disasters. And Christy, when you were telling me that, I could see your heart. I could see your heart. I could see where your heart is certainly in pain for both the communities, of course,
Mhm.
as well as those sites. And I think we must be, if anything, sensitive to those things. And we kind of forget, we get forget about those things and the impact. Maybe in the middle of hearing things, we don't really think about the impact on the archaeological sites as much as the towns being devastated and millions of people could be displaced and even
And I
lost.
mean, I get it
So,
because human life at the
of
end of the
course,
day is
right,
always, number one, right?
right,
Um,
of
you
course,
know, you can't replace humans and
of
human
course,
lives.
of course.
But, definitely a secondary loss would be, the history and archaeology of a site. Because once it's gone, you can't get
Yeah.
that back.
Yeah, and there could be so much there that helps just continue the conversation, right? Continue to tell the story. And I think that's the beautiful part about archaeology and what we do here at the Biblical History Center. Well, I also want to hear what you also wanted to talk about. Talk a little bit about what you mentioned earlier. I would love to talk about that on today's podcast as a second topic of discussion.
Yeah. So, a really interesting discovery was made at Qumran, and it involves tefillin. So, if you don't know what tefillin are, they are the black straps that you use to tie phylacteries on, or that Jews use to tie phylacteries on when they pray. They're
Right.
traditionally, but not exclusively, worn by men, and they're usually given as gifts once a child, typically male, is bar mitzvahed when they're 13. For a lady, it would be bat mitzvahed. So the oldest known ones were found in Qumran, which is very exciting, dating to the end of the Second Temple
Second temple.
period,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
which means before the temple was destroyed in 70 AD.
Right.
And it's been thought that, according to rabbinic law, for as long as we know of, these were required to be leather covered in black. However, this recent study done by both Israelis and a British research team show that these tefillin uncovered in Qumran were not dyed black.
Right.
So that's pretty interesting. It's always so cool when you find something like this that ties with ancient tradition, because then it's like, okay, well, when did they
Right.
start requiring them
Yes.
to be
Yes.
black?
Yeah.
When did that happen? So that's just shows a pivotal shift somewhere in Judaism between 70 AD and
Right.
the modern era,
Right.
uh, of this requirement of the black tefillin. So there were a couple of ways that they could have been made black, usually with soot or charcoal in the first century, or it could just naturally
Yeah.
oxidize, right? Or they could use plant oxides or iron oxides, organic compounds, that kind of thing. Um, but it definitely would not have been an easy process. So maybe that's why these in Qumran are not dyed black. It was just too difficult, maybe too messy, or maybe at the time it just wasn't even a requirement. And these are so cool because a lot of people see Judaism as a very static um, religion that hasn't changed over thousands of years.
Goodness.
And certainly, it has been consistent, fairly consistent through time. But we do see little changes like
Yeah,
this.
yeah,
So
yeah.
the
Beautiful.
tefillin are no originally were not required to be dyed black, apparently.
Yeah.
Or Passover is another excellent example of this, how new traditions are added into that feast. So, for example, in the Old Testament, we see God commanding the Israelites to eat the first Passover before they leave Egypt, standing up, staff in hand. But by the time of Christ, we see the rabbis teaching that you should be reclined at a table.
Mhm.
And that's the symbolism of that. So there's change there as well. And now most modern Jews, I would say, eat Passover sitting down around their dining room table,
Mhm.
just like any major holiday meal would be
Right,
had, you know?
right.
So these tefillin just illustrate that so beautifully.
It shows the dynamic in the evolution of Jewish law. Would you agree?
Yeah, yeah. I wouldn't necessarily say the law itself changed,
Right.
but certainly the execution.
Evolving. Right, right, right,
Hmm.
right, right, right. Christy, talk a little bit about there was some scientific testing that took place. Is that correct?
Yes. So um, they did do testing, and the leather, because the leather was dark, so they just wanted to find evidence for like dyeing methods. Was it dyed? Because it was remarkably well preserved, but that's when they found out it was not due to any dyeing. It was just the aging of the leather, meaning that the tefillin was not black. It had just turned black over time as the leather aged when it was, buried in the desert for 2,000 years.
Right.
Um, and so that tells us that there wasn't a significance to them being black at the time. And it was sometime, after that when they were required to be dyed black. Um, so that testing was a vital point in figuring out the nature of these tefillin and how they're different from modern tefillin.
Well, what a beautiful find! What a beautiful discovery! Certainly eye-opening. I can see
Mhm.
why. I know you majored in Jewish studies. I can see why this is certainly something you wanted to discuss. And here at the Biblical History Center, it's a continuation of this conversation, constantly having communication or communicating Jewish law and traditions that took place. And what a beautiful insight that this brings about, Christy. I am
Mhm.
extremely grateful that you brought this. Yeah, yeah, I could see you're wanting to say something else. I'm sorry, go for it.
No, it's okay. Well, I just wanted to tie it in there too for the Christians in the audience. Jesus actually mentions phylacteries in Matthew 23, verse
Right, right,
5.
right, yeah, yeah.
And so he says the Pharisees made their phylacteries wide and the tassels on their garments long. And so that just, Jesus himself knew what these were, and these date to really close to his lifetime. And so this is really something very similar to what Jesus himself might have been praying with something like this when he went to the temple to worship.
Right. What a well-known practice, right?
Mhm.
Is really the case is what we read in Matthew 23. So, ladies and gentlemen, those of you that are listening, we wanted to take a moment and bring to you another podcast. As much as we can, we're going to try to record maybe weekly or bi-weekly. But we wanted to just bring to you some insights of some new findings that have come about. And it's certainly great to have Christy with us. Christy, again, we're so grateful. We're so thrilled to have you back. And I believe on the next podcast, we'll probably have Emily, and then we'll probably rotate and then bring everyone together. But Christy, wanted to say thank you for hopping on this podcast with me. Those of you that are listening, we want to welcome you back to the Biblical History Center if you've been before. But if you haven't, share this podcast with a friend. We'd love to have you. There's a lot of new things happening. We've got a partnership coming up with the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C., that we're partnering with. A lot of partnerships are taking place. A lot of great lectures are on their way. I believe the next one we've got is from Lipscomb University. A lot happens in this museum, and we're so very
Mhm.
grateful. And we couldn't do it without supporters like you. So, Carlos Cantu, your executive director here at the Biblical History Center, would love to say thank you for making us one of the top 10 podcasts. We recently were nominated. Did you see that, Christy? We were
Yeah, that was so
awarded.
cool.
Yeah, so cool. Awarded top 10 podcasts in the archaeological biblical world. And what an exciting thing, but we're certainly humbled. And we thank you for your time that you take to listen to us. And Christy, our director of programming and education, thank you again for joining this time. Thank you for bringing about just constant teaching. And once again, folks, we thank you again for listening, and we'll see you again next time. Take care.
Bye.
Bye bye.